It's hopeless, Joshua.
Can you mute on yours for a second, and I'll talk over here, and then not to mute.
All right. Ooh. Let's try it again. All right, sounds are good. Okay, so hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to everyone online as well. Today is August 1st, and this is the Atlanta FileMaker Developers Group. So let's go around the room, and we'll start with introductions. And we'll start over here.
Hi, I'm Joshua, 360Works.
Hi, I'm Warren, 360Works. I'm Sean, 360Works.
You guys can say like a sentence.
I'm Source Cagle, NZR Corporation.
David Cox, I'm retired from the state of Georgia.
Tom Daniel and I are returning to the fold after absence.
Welcome back to the meetings in person.
Yeah.
I'm Todd Daniel, the entry enforcer.
Erica Kidd. Christy McAdvantage.
Jesse Barnum, 360Works.
Earl Cook, Laser Solutions.
All right, and my name is David Naadel with Blue Feather. So today our presenter is Jesse Barnum from 360Works, and he's going to be presenting on using Amazon Web Services with FileMaker. And I think this is kind of like a rehearsal for your DevCon presentation, right?
So if you can see my screen, this is obviously a DevCon slide here.
I'm going to transfer this to you right now.
All right.
Unmute your microphone.
Yep, so now, Jesse, you unmute.
Okay. Am my audio coming through now? Okay, all right. So I am going to be doing just like a straight run through of what I'm going to be doing next Tuesday or next Wednesday, actually. So exactly a week from today, I'll be doing this session at DevCon. I'm going to try to kind of time it like I would with DevCon, which means that I'm going to have an hour at DevCon. So I'm going to try to get through this in about an hour, which if successful means we may wrap up early. Also, on an unrelated note, my dad is having a procedure done, and so he's done with it. So I told him I would try to leave as soon as I could. So I'm going to try and get through this, and I am actually going to, I'm going to clear out as soon as I finish because I want to get to the hospital and just check on him and make sure he's okay. One thing I will kind of do differently than during DevCon is that you guys, I would love to get your questions. I think the questions I think when I'm in Dallas, I'll probably try to discourage questions during the session. But at this meeting, any questions you guys have would be great because for one thing, it'll just make it more fun. And for another thing, it'll help me figure out if I'm not explaining things in the right order. So questions or just like comments, feedback, like you would, if you say something like, hey, Jesse, you went too fast on this part and you skipped over that part and I didn't understand what you were saying there. Please let me know because I'll modify the presentation so that, when I'm doing it in front of a few hundred people, it'll hopefully make sense to everybody. So I would love to get your comments, feedback, and questions as I go so I can improve this. And I've got another window open to take notes as I go. Please help me out and help make this presentation better. Okay, so I'm going to jump in. It's 7:08 right now. And so my topic is Beyond Virtual Machines, Tapping into the AWS Universe from FileMaker. This is a little bit about who I am. I founded 360Works in 1996. I'm certified in FileMaker. I speak at DevCon. This is, I think, my 5th time. And I do a vendor session every year at DevCon. Received some awards. I think the thing that's relevant to this conversation is the bullet points about started using AWS in 2009. And we've moved all of our critical business services to Amazon Web Services. So the first thing that we started using AWS for was for downloads on our products. So we used to have a server physically here in our office that whenever you would download a 360Works product, you were getting it off of the server in the closet downstairs. And so we moved all that to Amazon, and it was tremendously more reliable, tremendously faster. I think now we're like, we get several thousand downloads per month, so I think our monthly bill is now about $2. Like, for real, that's, I mean, Amazon just, all their services are so cheap that they border on free. With the idea that, you know, they have very high volume customers that generate revenue for them. But for most of the kinds of projects that I work on and most of us work on, stuff is like almost, it's almost free. And in many cases, it actually literally is free because you have like a cutoff. You have to exceed like 1 million requests per month before they start charging you for an extra 40 cents per million requests, for instance, in the case of Simple Queue service. So I love Amazon and I've been using it for a long time. And so I'll talk a little bit more as I keep going. Let's talk about what we're going to cover and also what we're not going to cover. First, I'm going to put this, actually, I'm going to move the order things around here. I just added this before we started. We're going to, if anybody would like to, I'm going to have a little audience participation thing later in this, towards the end. And so it will be hosted on my laptop, which is jesse.local. There's a database on there called Personnel Records Kinesis Demo. If you'd like to log in, if you're on the, oh, do I need to be on the, I should probably be on the guest network for everyone to be able to access that.
You might drop out if you switch.
Oh, okay. Well, then I don't want to lose the network. So we won't actually, I'll just do I can do the demo fine myself. During DevCon, it'll be kind of interesting because I'll probably have 50 to 100 people all connecting in at the same time to do some load testing, which should be interesting. Although I think Jill Martin can probably generate more load than all combined. I was like, all right, I want everyone to quickly do this thing. And I walk over there and Jill's like, so what we're going to talk about is interacting directly with Amazon Web Service APIs. We're not going to be talking about plugins, even though we're a plugin vendor. We're not going to be talking about plugins. We're not going to be talking about any third-party software. This is just cool tricks that you can do directly with the built-in stuff in FileMaker. We're going to talk about how to sign AWS calls. The biggest barrier to entry on using Amazon Web Services is that they have a very complicated process for signing requests that go up to Amazon. And there's a reason for that. It's a good reason, and I'll talk about it more when I get to that part. But it's always been a barrier to try to make your own calls directly to Amazon because it's just very challenging to authenticate your request correctly just using built-in features in FileMaker. We'll talk about how to do that.
And we're doing FileMaker 16 or 17?
Well, this is all stuff that requires 16 or later.
Okay.
So I'm actually using 17 for my demos.
Might want to make that clear in your new calc functions and crawl actions in FileMaker 16 or later.
Okay. So we're going to be using extensively the JSON feature, and then you won't see it as much, but there's a whole lot of calls to the crypt auth code, crypt digest, hexen code, and sort values code. And I'm going to talk about useful Amazon APIs for FileMaker developers, and ways that you could use it in these things in ways that are useful for FileMaker. Some stuff that we're not going to cover. A lot of times in a FileMaker context, when people hear AWS or Amazon Web Services, they immediately assume that we're talking about here's how you deploy FileMaker server with Amazon Web Services. That's not what I'm covering. I actually did a DevCon session on that in 2016. And it was great, but that's not what we're doing. This is really assuming that you already know how to install FileMaker server on AWS, that you know how to deploy FileMaker Cloud. You don't actually need to be running FileMaker server on Amazon to use any of this stuff. This will work, you know, whether you're hosting FileMaker server in your own office or the client's office or on Amazon or in Azure or anywhere else. So how many Amazon Web Services are there? There are, according to my informal count, 131. That's just going through the product section and counting them up. And I will be demonstrating 5 of them. So the ones I'll be talking about are Kinesis, Transcribe, S3, Translate, and Athena. It's not that the other 126 aren't also really cool, but I only have an hour. So there's just, I put this slide in here to convey some idea of the breadth and scope of the Amazon Web Services. Some examples of things I won't be demoing are video transcoding and any of the artificial intelligence processing and image recognition. There's just so much stuff. It's a little daunting at how much stuff there is, but you don't have to learn it all. You just can pick a specific thing and really learn it and use it and then kind of move on to something new. So there's an entire list at amazon.com/products. So I'm going to start with a very simple service called the Simple Queue Service, SQS. And I'll just jump into FileMaker, I'll show it to you working, and I'll kind of talk briefly about what you would use it for. Talk very briefly, actually, about that. So my first question is this legible? Can people see this? Do I need to be zooming in?
Could be a little larger.
Okay.
Maybe in your demo,
There you go.
layout, make the font bigger.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll try and rearrange these layouts so I can use the magnifying thing.
You can also do Zoom, can't you?
Yeah, I can do this.
On View, Zoom, and FileMaker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I really need to kind of tweak my layouts to work that way.
Yeah.
So that's what I was just making a note to myself. I'll tweak those layouts and use the Zoom feature. So Simple Queue Service is, sorry, I'm jumping all over the place with the zooming. Simple Queue Service is about the simplest Amazon service there is, which is why I picked it for this. You have a URL representing a queue, and a queue in computer science terms is basically you add something to it, and then you take things off of it, and the first thing you add to it is the first thing you'll get when you take it off, as opposed to a stack, which is you add things to it, but then the last thing that you add is the first thing you get off. So that's the difference between a queue and a stack. So this is a simple queue. And so you say, here is a URL corresponding to the particular queue that I want to add a message to. Here's a message, and I'm going to click this queue message. And I should have tested this before I started.
You don't have to.
Shoot. All right, I'm going to quickly do some debugging.
Is there a dot after each? Look at your.
Debugging is the most informative part. We get to see all
Yeah,
the
all right, there you go. That's a.
It looks bouncy.
common
John.
pitfalls. This is the new common pitfalls when you're working with the service section of the presentation.
I think this is actually a bug in my thing. This is probably where it dies right here. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, so the URL that it's doing is $URL. URL.
There was 3 slashes, no S.
Yeah, well, there's also no host name path, or there's a lot wrong there. This is a huge script too. This is gonna. What have I done?
Is that canonical query variable populated?
Sorry, what's that, Joe?
Is that canonical query variable populated? I don't know. That's just on line 135.
Is that
URL? That's just the first thing that.
Okay. I changed a few variable names to make them simpler and easier to understand, and I probably didn't. I thought I ran a test after I did that. Let me do this one more time. Now that I know, now that I understand that the URL is just coming in blank, let's figure out. So I was not actually intending to go into the script in detail, but now I will. Let's take a look at what is my script parameter. Oh, I don't have, okay, the problem, I think, okay, the good news is, I think all I messed up was actually my simple queue service demo. I don't think I messed up my other demos. If that's the case, I'm not going to bother fixing it. Let me test one of my other things. Let's try Kinesis for a second. Yeah, okay. This I can fix offline. I know what I did too. Well, it might be super fast to fix it. Hold on. I created a simplified version of my script. Let's replace it back with the original version and see if that takes it. Yes, okay. Well, that was lucky. All right, let's rewind, pretend none of that stuff happened. And let's, here I go. How do you guys like seeing that screen that you've never seen before? So here I am, and I'm going to queue this message, and I'll click queue message here. And so that just sent an HTTP request to Amazon using a post and a signed request. And if I look over here in my Amazon console, I've got the simple queue service open, and these are all of my different queues right here. And they all have various names. You'll see it, like, for instance, Cloud Mail is a bunch of them. Our Cloud Mail product uses SQS extensively. And if I look at the one called test, which is the one that I was sending to, as you can see right here, test. If I look at that test one, and I say view and delete messages, start polling, there are the messages that I just sent. And if I queue a bunch of them very quickly, let me show you something in here. While I'm clicking queue, each time I do it, it's queuing in a message, and I want to call your attention to these numbers right here. The signing part, that means it's taking 4 milliseconds for FileMaker to do its processing. It's taking 92 to 96 milliseconds for it to send the HTTP request and receive the response. So this is really not slowing FileMaker down. It's not using your CPU very much at all. It's 4 milliseconds of processing time each time hitting that button, and then 92 seconds of waiting, or milliseconds of waiting, for a total of 96 milliseconds. And each time I do that, those messages are appearing here in this list. And I can click on more details, and I can see the body that I'm posting. And let's delete a bunch of them. You can see more, because I think it only shows me like 10 or something. So I can delete these messages from the queue. Message, queue this. It should appear here before long. It checks every 30 seconds. Change the message, there it is. And so this is demonstrating how you can post messages to Amazon's simple queue service. And I don't want to get too bogged down in talking about simple queue service, but let's just quickly talk about why you might use this. We use it, for instance, with Cloud Mail, because with Cloud Mail, let's say you want to send an email list to 200,000 people. With simple queue service, we can just queue all those messages up. Amazon manages the storage of that queue. We don't need to worry about running out of disk space, running out of memory, sending the messages too fast. None of that stuff is relevant. There's nothing that can basically fail on the receiving end of that. So we have an almost guaranteed ability to add messages to the queue that should go out without worrying about whether the queue is full or incapable of handling more messages. Then we have another Amazon instance, an EC2 Linux box, actually, that comes as part of the Cloud Mail plugin, that does the opposite. It pops messages off of this queue, sending them out as it goes. And it's very fast, and it's multi-threaded, so it's popping them off very quickly, thousands per minute or thousands per second, hundreds per second. Very quickly popping them off of the queue and then sending out those email blasts. So that's how Cloud Mail works, for instance. If I wasn't using simple queue service, I could send messages directly from FileMaker to that Amazon instance, But if that Amazon instance was down for any reason, or if it ran out of hard drive space, or if it was just too busy, or anything like that, then it would block my ability to send messages to it from FileMaker, and I would need to add a bunch of retry and things like that on the FileMaker side. By using Simple Queue Service, I never need to retry anything, because I know that those queues, which are managed by Amazon, will always be available and will always be accepting messages. I could shut my Amazon instance down for a day and turn it back on, and it wouldn't interrupt my ability to be able to queue messages. It would just take them and process them once that sending box came back up.
Can you put the sending to of these messages in the queue like during low peak times?
I would probably the sending the messages to the queue is so inconsequential that I don't think I would worry about scheduling that, but I could definitely see doing something like that on the receiving end, because typically it's a very low effort to put them on, and oftentimes a use case for Simple Queue is kind of a work queue. I'm sticking jobs on a stack, and then there's one or more machines that are pulling jobs off of the stack and running those jobs, which is what CloudMail does. Because it's a queue, I could actually theoretically, and we've never had this much volume to need this, but if we were sending out 10 million messages, instead of one instance, I could have 10 instances, and they could all be popping messages off the queue. And Simple Queue Service is smart enough to make sure that each instance only gets each message, each message in the queue just goes to one of those instances. So it just gives me a buffer, basically, between things that are requesting work and one or more machines that are actually doing the work. And you could definitely schedule off time. So you might say, I only want to run my worker machine between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. Just fire up, pull as much as you can off of that queue in the time that you have, and then shut down. And that would be a really good use case for a queue as opposed to a live delivery mechanism. So what I really wanted to show here is how the script works on the FileMaker side. Not so much about Simple Queue Service, but how the script works. And this part right here, I'm going to ignore. And by the time I get to DevCon, I'll actually delete this, because this is all stuff having to do with attributes, which just complicates things. And it'll probably actually break if I do that, because that's what I just tried doing before that gave me the bad URL. But I'm just doing that visually so that we don't get distracted by it as we're going through this. All of these scripts here on the left side represent different Amazon services. This is Simple Queue Service. This is Simple Storage S3. This is Kinesis, Transcribe, Translate. And they're all calling this script right here, this AWS General Script that sends a request and returns a raw response. So this doesn't know about the service that we're calling. This is designed to work with any Amazon service, because they all share a very similar signing process and authentication process. So with that in mind, let's jump back to our Simple Queue Service thing and see how we call that general script. So what we're doing is we're creating a JSON variable that has certain values, and these are set for every type of AWS service. We always need an access key, a secret key, a region. We always need these three parameters. And if you've used AWS ever, you know that you create an AWS account and you get an access key and a secret key. And the region represents, like for instance, Virginia is a region, and Northern California is a region, and Sao Paulo is a region, and Frankfurt is a region, and Mumbai is a region. And there's I think 15 regions around the world. And so you specify what region, hey, how you doing? What region it is that you want to send to. And those three things are always required in order for Amazon to do anything with any API that you talk to. I've added an ability to curl options. So curl is the library that FileMaker uses to send HTTP requests. And if you specify options like, for instance, a timeout of 10 seconds, for instance, you could pass that in there, and then all the calls you make would time out after 10 seconds if it's not reachable. And then you can also specify whether you want HTTPS. You can toggle that on or off. And I'll talk a little bit more about HTTPS when I get into talking about the authentication and the signing mechanism. But so every Amazon call that I make needs to have these items in our JSON variable. Then I'm going to add a few more things that are specific to Simple Queue Service. So the service name is SQS. And this is a version of the SQS API that we're talking to. and the action that we want. These are going into the post data section of our JSON variable. And then when I get to the other script, it's going to take whatever I put in the post data and just send that as a post with my HTTP request. Now we set the specific thing that we want for this particular SQS message, which is whatever you put in that message field, which is where I had like, hey, or this is a message or something like that. And that gets added to the post data section of the JSON data. Oh, this is actually, okay. Now I see why my thing isn't working. I'm not directly adding this to the JSON variable. I'm creating a post data. And then if I had this down here, this is the critical line that I needed. This is the one that sets the post data in the JSON variable to that. So let's run this with a script debugger on, and let's look at our post data when we go to run this. Save all. I'm going to let it run here. And so now we're ready to call that generic script. Let's look and see what our JSON variable looks like. I will add, and of course we can do that in FileMaker too. So this is what it looks like when I'm calling our generic script. So every call is going to have my access key, my secret key. I'm not passing any curl options. I'm not doing HTTPS on this. This is my post data, which contains the message itself, the version of the SQS API I want, the action that I want to do, and the region that I'm doing. So that's what the post variable looks like. And then when it goes into the generic script, I'm not going to go line by line through this script. What I really want to do is just kind of show you what the sections are. And the reason I want to show this is because if you're using this for your own solutions and you're doing your own API calls to potentially different Amazon APIs, you'll need to know what things we're expecting to see in that JSON data. So the things we're expecting to see are these need to be set in every request: the host, the region, the service name like SQS, the access key, and the secret key. And then these will vary depending on which service it is that you're calling. All the services that I'm demoing can be done using this set of parameters. This is the file, and by file, what I really mean is the portion of the URL that comes after the host name. It doesn't literally represent a file. It's just in a URL, you refer to the part that comes after the host name as the file of the URL. So if you want any query params, if you're doing an HTTP GET and you need to include query params for the particular API that you're calling, you would add that here. You would set HTTPS to be a 1 or a 0 depending on whether you want that to be encrypted. If you need to supply custom request headers, you can put them here. And you know, I just realized I should really be showing you guys, should be part of my presentation, when I should be recording this too.
It's getting recorded.
Oh, it is? Okay, good. Good, thanks. So where I really should have started here is showing you what the Amazon documentation looks like for calling SQS. So look for AWS SQS API reference. Just replace SQS with whatever service you're wanting to talk to. If you want translate, you do AWS Translate API reference. And here's our simple queue service reference. And the particular thing that, so here is all about how to talk to simple queue service. This is the reference data, which is separate from the developer documentation. If you're using a new API for the first time, read the developer documentation to understand it conceptually. When you're ready to actually start calling it from FileMaker, come in and read this reference section. So the message, the particular action that I'm doing is going to be send message. And send message can take all these different request parameters: delay seconds, message attributes, message body, whether we want to deduplicate, group ID, queue URL, and then these are the things that come back in the response that we get. I'm not dwelling on these things because we've got a lot of services to cover, but I do want you guys to understand how to read the AWS documentation and how to kind of translate it into terms that you can call from FileMaker. So the things that we're really looking for here are the ones where it's required is yes. So delay seconds is not required. Neither is message attribute. Message body is required yes. The deduplication ID is not required. The group ID is not required. The queue URL is not required.
It is.
Oh, I'm sorry, the queue URL, thank you. And many of these have an example, which is obviously very helpful. So you can see here, the way we call this is going to be my service name, my region, the queue. This portion of it here is basically the file. Remember, I talked about the files, everything that comes after the host name. The action, which is send message from this list over here, and then all of the things that we want to include as parameters come in as the post data. So here's my message body. I could optionally set attributes and things like that. And then this is the response that I'll get back from Amazon. So now we kind of have a better idea of what we're trying to do to get it to do this simple queue call. So with that in mind, I'm going to make myself a little note there. With that in mind, now these things will probably make more sense. That we're saying these are the request headers. As you saw there are no special request headers needed for simple queue service, but other services, like Translate, for instance, need to set certain headers. And so this is how you would set them as pipe.
So these parameters that you're going through apply to all of them, but with the queue that you're talking about, it's not required.
With the service that I'm talking about, yeah. And so if it said headers, if there are certain headers required, then in your JSON data, you would have a request headers element, and inside that request headers element would be the keys and values that you want to set for each header. And then post data, which is the most important thing in the case of simple queue service, because all those different attributes are basically just embedded as the post data. You can see that in the example. Put container field is used if you're needing to send container data. Like when we use S3, we want to upload and download containers. So if you want to send the contents of a container field to Amazon, you put the name of the field as the put container field. And then we'll use the evaluate function to get the contents of that and send that container data along with the API call. And then the method, which can be get, post, put, delete, or any other valid method. In most cases, we can figure that out, because if you're specifying post data, we assume that you want to do a post. If you're specifying a container field, we're assuming that you want to do a put. So this is not usually needed, but it's there if you need it. And then curl options, like we talked about, like timeouts. Everything below here is stuff that you don't need to get into if you don't want to. And I'm just going to very slowly scroll through this just so you can get a very kind of cursory idea of what it's doing. It's doing a whole bunch of hashing using the crypt digest and the hexing code. It's using the SHA-256 algorithm, and it's generating this payload hash. That's a hard-coded empty value because that's the hash of an empty string, because in many cases we're just going to need an empty string hash. We need to take all of our keys and values, put them in alphabetical order, make them all lowercase, and we create canonical headers, which is the same thing. Put them lowercase, alphabetical order. We need to generate a timestamp in a very specific format. Then we put all these things together as delimiters. We create a set of curl options that we're going to use to actually call our insert from URL function with. And we're going to set our method, to post, put, or get, unless it's specifically specified as the method. We're going to create the string to sign. We're going to do more hashing with SHA-256. And here's where we actually insert from URL. So this is the part where we actually talk to Amazon. We send that entire thing using all those options that we specified. We specify that we want to have compression and all that kind of stuff. And then we just read the results back, and we store them in a JSON variable at the very end into this script result. And we exit with the script result. So I know I kind of just hand waved over a lot of that, But I'm going to show in the slides an example of how that works, and then it'll be a little bit more clear. And besides, this is not stuff you actually have to know unless you, for some reason, wanted to rewrite the script. So let's talk about well, let's give an example of what I just showed you in that script. This is the signing process. So for this, I'm going to make this a little bigger. So you can read about how the signing process works at this URL. And Amazon gives you step-by-step instructions. They're complicated and they're lengthy, but they're very well documented, and they give you examples of each step showing you how to sign it. So this is what our original simple queue service request would look like. It's a post. It's going to that host. It's our FileMaker, our user agent, and then just standard stuff, content length, content type, and then the actual post data. So this is what the request would look like if we weren't including any signing authentication information. We will then add some required headers. One is the date right here in this specific time format, and then the other is a SHA-256 hash of all of this. We take up our post data and we generate a SHA-256 hash of that. And the next thing we do is we take that request and we put it into what's called a canonical version. And the canonical version is rearranging that request so that it is extremely deterministic about how the things are formatted. They have to be in all lowercase, they have to be in alphabetical order. The reason it's so strict is because the way Amazon will authenticate this is it's going to take your request and do the same thing on its end. It's going to put it into the same exact format as how we're putting this into our format. And then at the end of this whole process, they have to perfectly match. That's why it's case sensitive and needs to be in alphabetical order. So we rearrange our request essentially into this order, specifying our headers up here and specifying our parameters, or the names of the headers down here. We then take a hash of that entire string, and that becomes this white value. We add these red values here, which is the algorithm that we're using. Again, with the time, I don't know why we do the timestamp so many times, but we do the timestamp a lot of times. Now just the date without the time, the region that we're going to, the service that we want, and the version that we're using to sign this. We hash this entire thing.
Wow.
And then we use that to generate a signature here. And then we put in our Amazon access key, which is not a secret. You know, our Amazon access key is not intended to be confidential. It's the secret key that's confidential. So the secret key is used to generate this hash using the crypt functions in FileMaker 16. The access key is just included unhashed and unencrypted as a header right here. And again, restating the region, the service, and the signing version that we're using. And then that gets reincorporated into our original request. So the white part is what we originally had. We talked about how we need to have this Amazon date and this hash. And now we add these authorization headers that is an extensive hash of a hash of a hash of all these things that we're doing. And the fact that we're doing these hashes multiple times doesn't really matter. What matters is just that we do it the exact same way, using the exact same secret key that Amazon does. And they should wind up getting the exact same signature that we get when they run our request through their hashing algorithms using the same secret key that we use to generate this hash. And that's how they know this request came from us. So you might ask, well, that seems a lot more complicated than a lot of things that I use. Why is it so complicated? Why should it be that way? And there's actually a lot of really compelling reasons for that. And you kind of wind up saying, why don't the other services do it this way? One very powerful thing about this is that you don't need SSL. And if you skip SSL, you can often do 3 times as many requests per second. And if the contents of the messages that you're sending are not in and of themselves highly confidential, you can turn off SSL and still have total security of not ever sending your secret key over the network. Because the way this works is not by sending it's not like a traditional thing that we think of as send me your password and I'll see if it matches. What this is basically doing is Amazon has your secret key. You also have your secret key. You use the secret key to generate this hash. Amazon uses the same secret key to generate another hash of kind of the same way that you would send your request, and it just checks to see if the hashes match. So you're never having to send your password or your secret key over the network at all, which means that it's safe to not use SSL, get better throughput in cases where the data itself is not highly confidential. It's immune to replay attacks because all those timestamps that we kept sticking in there, those have to be within 5 minutes of when Amazon receives it. If it's past 5 minutes, then Amazon won't accept it. And after 5 minutes, you would need to regenerate with a new hash. So if somebody intercepted this message, they couldn't pretend to be you and send it an hour later, because then the hashes wouldn't match anymore.
They would have to.
They'd have to regenerate a new hash.
They'd have to regenerate a new hash with a secret key they don't have.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They could resend the exact same message that you sent.
And Amazon would kick it back.
So is 5 minutes the default, or can you set it for even?
You cannot
less?
change that because that's an important security consideration.
So you can make it less time.
No, and I don't think you'd want to, because you can have clock drift. I mean, I guess, yeah, there's a case to be made for maybe less time. But I guess Amazon doesn't feel like that needs to be done. So you're never sending secret keys at all. It's immune to man-in-the-middle attacks, meaning that because of that immune to replay attacks, you're never sending your password through here, so someone can't pose as Amazon to get your password. It avoids an extra login HTTP request. A lot of services, like FileMaker, for instance, if you use the data API of FileMaker, you send your password over the wire to FileMaker and you get back a token. And then the token is valid for a certain number of minutes, like 15 minutes. This avoids that extra request. It avoids sending the password in the first place. And probably most important for Amazon's purposes is this last point on here. Remember, they don't have a server at the other end validating this. They have thousands, maybe tens of thousands of servers that are potentially getting these queue messages. Imagine how complicated it would be if you sent a login thing, they sent you back a token, and then they needed to distribute that login token to all 2,000 other computers along with an expiration date of when it's good for. It would be an exponential slowdown as you get more and more servers and more customers. So this is a stateless thing. They can have a server, they can have a cluster of 10,000 servers, and each one just independently validates against your secret key. And so it's not having to track like logins and expirations. So that's why there is the complicated signature. And it is a little bit of a pain in the butt. And I've tried to kind of write the script so that you don't have to think about it, but that's why it's there. And there's good arguments for doing it that way. So let's get into some more interesting demos in the Simple Queue service. So I want to show you, and I'm guessing that a lot of people are familiar with Amazon S3. If you're not, then Amazon S3 is stands for Simple Storage Service, and it's just a cloud file service. It's extremely inexpensive. It costs anywhere between 1 cent, no, a third of a cent to 2.5 cents per gigabyte per month to store data. So it's extremely inexpensive, and it's an extremely reliable and fast way of allowing users and clients and customers to be able to download and upload files to you. It's much more efficient and effective than, say, FTP or anything along those lines, and it includes the storage as well. And so what I'm going to do is I've got this. I'm going to jump over to my S3 console, and I'm in my DevCon folder. I'm going to refresh it. There's nothing here, and so I'm going to upload this. And I'm not really, now that you guys have seen kind of the under the hood thing on the scripts, I'm not really going to show you any more scripts from here on out. I'm just going to kind of be showing you what you can do with this stuff. So I've got this audio file. It's about 700 kilobytes. I'm going to upload this file.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that took 6 seconds to generate my signature and about 2 seconds to upload it. Notice that the more times I upload it, well, I did all my testing at home. I haven't done it using the apparently crappy network here at 360Works. So it It takes about 0.9 seconds to do it from home. It takes about 3 seconds to do it here. But the point is that when I look at this folder here, I forgot to show, this is the bucket that I'm uploading to here is test.360works. The path that I'm uploading to is devcon 2018/upload file/declaration. And so if I look in upload file, there's declaration.m4a. Also, just as a little minor point, notice that the file doesn't have to really match the name. Declaration of Independence is not what I decided to call it. I decided to call it declaration.m4a. So I can upload it to some path other than the name of the actual file. So that uploaded my 700 kilobyte file. If I wanted to, I could, let me duplicate this. I'll get rid of my file here. I'll download it. Downloading seems to be a little bit faster. So that just downloaded that 700 kilobyte file. So you can see it's very simple to upload and download from container fields into S3. And once you upload them to S3, you can do anything you want with them, including making them easily available to customers if you wanted to, or using it as a file storage system. I mean, it's like I said, it's incredibly cheap to store that stuff. This is, for instance, our safety net service uses S3 to store all of your offsite backups for FileMaker server. And I know I said I wasn't going to jump into scripts, but I just want to show you there is very little to do here for the S3 script. We do this just like we did. This is the same for every SQL or every Amazon call. We need an access key, a secret key, and a region. This is stuff that's specific to S3, a host, a file, the name of the, remember I talked about this put container field? So the name of our container field is file, the name of the service, whether or not we want it encrypted, and then we just run our script and it does it. So you can see that if you were to use this in your own solution, you would basically copy and paste this script and this script into your solution, and then customize this script and specifically customize these values to control which file you wanted to upload and where you wanted to upload it to. So that's S3. Let's talk about transcription. So now I've got this nice little audio file up on S3. Now I'm going to use another Amazon service called Transcribe, which is one of their newest services and one of my personal favorites. And so I have a few parameters up here. I run this, a start transcription call. The transcription is not instantaneous in real time. In my experience, it's taken usually between 100 seconds to 200 seconds to run. So while that's running, let me just play the actual audio for you so you can see what it is that it's transcribing. And this is the part that I was saying I might need some audio.
When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect for the opinions of mankind requires that they should among men deriving their just principles and organizing its powers in such form.
NPR does this every year. They get on and they have various NPR radio hosts read sections of the Declaration of Independence. The thing I really want to call your attention to
them shall seem
is
most like
this is different people speaking. It's male and female. There's no training. There's no punctuation being spoken. Different, you know, none of these people have strong accents, but and they're professional announcers, so they enunciate clearly. But this is just a generic audio file that was taken that way from multiple different speakers. And if I run this, and it may not be done yet, so let's see what happens. So the transcription is still in progress. And that's actually a good opportunity to look at the result that we get from Amazon. So this debug, I store everything we get in here in this global variable, and we can see transcription job status is in progress. So you could certainly script this to run like an on-timer script every 10 seconds or 20 seconds or something like that, and run this get result function and check to see what the transcription job status is.
What it's basically doing is listening to the audio file, and it's going to produce a textual result of the audio file.
It's exactly, and it's really very impressive from an artificial intelligence standpoint, because we can get a result. You can see that not only did it get the text, it got the punctuation, the commas, the periods.
Wow.
And so it does that not just by listening for pauses. Obviously, it listens for things like pauses, but it also understands grammar, and it understands that it wouldn't make sense to say, you know, it wouldn't. It makes sense to put periods in certain places, grammatically speaking. Yeah, and different people speaking. And you know what else is really interesting? And I haven't enabled this yet, but I'm kind of jumping ahead. It can actually, in the detailed results that we get back, which I'm going to show you in just a second, it can actually tell you which person is speaking. So if it was an interview back and forth, it could say speaker 1 is saying this, speaker 2 is saying this. It also will tell you, if we pick up specific words here, like created, for instance, created was spoken at 31.251 seconds and then ended at 31.771 seconds.
You could create an index.
You can create an index. You can also correlate the words to where they occur in the audio. So if you wanted to say, for instance, start playing from the word truths, you can look up where the word truths occur and then know that that's 31 seconds into the audio and then play.
So you basically say, I want to read from this word of truth to this word of truth.
Yeah.
And get that range.
You could even, yeah, you could do things like, for instance, highlight a section of text and say, play the original audio of this section. And Amazon doesn't do all that for you, but it gives you all the data that you need in order to be able to do that yourself. So yeah, Transcribe is, like I said, one of my favorite services. I think DynamoDB is my favorite, but let's look at Translate. This is not surprising. This does exactly what you would kind of expect. If we wanted to send this to our French allies during the War of Independence, we would have just run it through Amazon Translate and send that to them. It supports all these different source and target languages, and I think they've added more since I put this demo together.
Now, can transcription, or is it smart enough to say that if it's in one language, can it transcribe to another language?
It doesn't transcribe in a language, but you could certainly chain these services together to do that yourself, like I just did.
Right.
Currently, Transcribe works for English and Spanish, and they are adding more languages, and they may have added more since, I mean, I did that research 6 months ago, so there may have been more added since then, but currently it will transcribe English and Spanish spoken audio.
So what if there's like multiple languages in like the transcribed file?
I don't think that would work, because when you, if we jump back to my transcribe example, one of the inputs that I provided was a language code. It didn't automatically detect the language, and I can't specify different language codes. I can't specify multiple ones. If I had some way of knowing where in the audio the language flipped, then I could break my audio file into chunks and then do separate uploads with a different language setting for each chunk, but I would have to know where the different languages started and stopped.
Or can you like say, put them like in separate chunks in different files going in?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So now we get to what I think is actually my favorite part of the demo. How are we doing? We're doing okay on time. Which is this personnel records Kinesis demo. So I know we didn't get a chance to like put it up on the Wi-Fi so everybody could connect.
I'm gonna guess that I can hit it up Jesse.
Oh, really? Okay. Oh, that's right, because I've got a public external IP address. Instead of going to, if anybody would like to join in, I can demo this on my own fine, but if you would like to, instead of jesse.local, you can go to jesse.360works.com. It's running FileMaker server. You'll see a list of a ton of databases on my server that are mostly all old and obsolete, but there's one that's called Personnel Records Kinesis Demo. And so if you wanted to look at that, you're welcome to. So when I click into this record, this is the straight out of the box Personnel Records demo that comes from FileMaker. And I flip through these records. I can see all of the 360Works employees.
What's the login?
Oh, I'm sorry, the login is devcon. So there's nothing really exciting here happening, except there actually is something kind of exciting happening. You just can't see it. What's happening is I have a script trigger. You know what? Before I'm going to change the order in which I demo this. So it's 7:59, and I just flipped through a few of these different records. And so now I'm going to go over to my Amazon Kinesis Firehose page. And Kinesis is a little bit like Simple Queue Service, except just smarter, more powerful, and more flexible options of what it can do with the messages that you post on there. So with Kinesis, you can post messages literally millions per second. There's no maximum. It's a ridiculously high maximum sending rate on Kinesis. So you can send an unlimited number of messages at any speed you want to Kinesis without overwhelming it. And then it can do whatever you program it to do with those messages. What I have it programmed to do is to dump all those messages into this S3 bucket. So there's our test bucket that we looked at before in our devcon path. And it's going to dump this every 1 megabyte or 60 seconds. So really what's happening here, I should have talked about this more in FileMaker. What's happening here is that every time I view a record, it makes a Kinesis call, and it makes an Amazon call saying, I'm viewing this record, and here's the date and time and my IP address and my logged in account name, and whether I'm using SSL to view it and all that kind of stuff. Every time I'm viewing a record, it's running a script trigger that is making an Amazon call to Kinesis. And then what Kinesis is configured to do is once we hit 1 megabyte of data or 60 seconds of activity, we're going to gzip that, and we're going to store in S3 under this devcon 2018 path. So if I jump back to S3, and I look in my devcon 2018, it gets put into a folder by year, month, day, hour. So 2018, August, the 1st, and they're in GMT time, so over there it's 23. And so these are various compressed records. And so if I download this, what you see is that every time I looked at a record, it added it to this return separated list and compressed it and wrote it and stored it in S3. And I can see the IP address that it was looking from, the username, the timestamp, all that kind of stuff, the action that was taken, which was to view a record. I haven't done things like editing and deleting and inserting records, because the purpose of this is not to build a full-fledged audit log system. The purpose is to show you how S3 and Kinesis work.
So it's basically a good logging system to be able to determine who's looking at what.
Yeah, and there's a lot of existing FileMaker logging systems out there, but they don't log views because it's too expensive to log views. Imagine if you were to create a FileMaker record every single time somebody flipped their Rolodex to look at another record. Imagine what that would do to your FileMaker server if you had 100 connected users. And every time they flip between a record, it has to create another record on FileMaker server. It would just kill it. But Kinesis can handle it with no problem. And it's not taking any processing time for us because Amazon is doing all that. And so Amazon creates all this. So now I've got this record, which is really valuable if you need to do HIPAA compliance, or if you're in Europe and you need to do GDPR compliance and have a thorough record of who's viewed which records. And it's not putting any load on your FileMaker server of creating records every time somebody's looking at something. So this is all cool, but it wouldn't be that user-friendly if an administrator came to me and said, I want to see every time somebody looked at record ID 6. I'd be like, well, there's about 10,000 gzip files in there. I'll get back to you next year and let you know after I download all this. So that brings me to our next cool Amazon service, which is called Athena. And so what Athena can do is Athena can run SQL queries on delimited data stored in S3. And Athena will go through of whatever folder you tell it, which I've told it to look in that devcon 2018 folder, and I can run an SQL query, and it will, in real time, look in on a massively parallel scale, look at all of those gzipped files, put them all together into memory, and run a query on all of those and show me the results here. So if I want to say select star from all of my audit activity where the ID is 6, it almost always takes less than 2 seconds. Oh, look, Jesse Barnum looked at that on this date and time. And so this could be over months or years, and it would probably take about the same amount of time to run this query, because even though I might have 10,000, 100,000 gzipped files in S3, Amazon is going to run that on 10,000, 100,000 different processing threads that are each looking at a little tiny gzip file to put all this stuff together. So it's a massively parallel query engine that's running off of compressed files stored on S3. So now I have a very effective way of tracking every time somebody views a record in my FileMaker system. And like I said, I could modify it to track edits and deletions and inserts with a little bit more work. But I want to show you how we can make it even better. So currently, I click this as fast as I can. And if you have the FileMaker database open, you might have noticed as well that it doesn't flip quite as fast as the Rolodex, when you don't have that script trigger. Because every time I'm doing it, there's 100 to 200 millisecond delay of that network request round trip. So what we can do, let's take a look at our script trigger. Here it is, trigger, log record detail view. So run on server is 0. You can see maybe where I'm going with this. Then we put together our value to store, which is basically just they viewed a record, here's the primary key, and then here's a whole bunch of context information with the get functions about what I want to store, the username, the IP address, etc. And so run on server 0, so I jumped in here, and I run this Kinesis example 1. It's the same exact example thing that I was showing when I did my demos in my other file. And all I did, by the way, like I was talking to you, I copied and pasted these 2 files from that. Remember, this is not the same file as this. This AWS functions is not the same file as personnel records. So what I did is I went into scripts and I copied and pasted the Kinesis example and my generic script, and I pasted them into this file, and then I slightly customized the Kinesis example so that instead of sending the value from a field, it sends whatever it gets as a script parameter. And I set that script parameter in the trigger. So that's all I did to be able to use this. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to change this from run on server to 1. Now it's going to do this with the perform script on server. Wait for completion is off, which means the only delay will be the very, very tiny delay that it takes for FileMaker server to request, FileMaker Pro to request FileMaker server to run that script. And so now that I've changed that, now my Rolodex feels just like I'm used to, and it's basically no perceptible delay in flipping between those records. So you might be thinking, well, now all you've done is you've moved the work from the client to the server. And now you've got 100 users that are all flipping between stuff, and you're creating a tremendous amount of work on the server. But really, we're not. Because, yes, it is true that the server is doing all this work. But on the other hand, remember how we were looking at those? If I run this Kinesis example, and I send this message, it takes 4 milliseconds of actual work to generate this request, and another 206 milliseconds of time waiting for the network. So the vast majority of time on these requests is just waiting for the network. It's not actually doing any work. So yes, we are putting all the work on the server, but it's only about 4 milliseconds per request for FileMaker server to generate this request and send it up to the server. And because everything is being done with script parameters and not fields, FileMaker server doesn't even need to lock in records or commit anything, because we're not creating records, we're not editing records, we're not even viewing records on FileMaker server. We're just taking a script parameter that we get and then making this call to Kinesis to store that script parameter on the server. So there's really nothing that would slow FileMaker server down. And as an aside, this is not something I'll talk about in the DevCon session, but just for here, I just I tested this yesterday or the day before here at 360Works, and I got everybody to log on and all click through the records as fast as they could to see what it did. And Joe with the bionic, it must be like a video game thing or something like that. I think Joe was generating 100 requests per second by himself. And what we found is that the FileMaker server statistics chart, where it shows you the wait time and elapsed time, all that kind of stuff, the wait time was 0, no matter what we did. The request per second shot up to like 600 per second, but the wait time was always 0, which makes sense because wait time is basically the amount of time it takes FileMaker server to lock an index or wait for an index that's locked. FileMaker never locks an index because we're not reading or editing any records on the server. And so this puts basically no load on the server at all. And the end result here is that, let's see what we've got now. I'm guessing we've got a few more of these files. Not seeing more of them. Maybe it hasn't been a minute yet since I started doing it.
Well, so is anyone remotely connected and scrolling through the records? Have you?
I couldn't
log in with DEFCON to DEFCON.
Yeah,
Oh,
I was gonna tell you later, but
this is the second time that this has happened, that I've made yeah, no, DevCon. What happens when we do that?
Your access privileges don't allow this.
yeah, I'm getting the same thing. It's not
FM app extended.
Oh, well, that's why. Apparently, the data entry set doesn't include any privileges. That's weird. Yeah.
That works.
Okay. Yeah, that's weird. This is a brand new out-of-the-box file, and apparently the data entry set doesn't have the extended privilege to log in FileMaker. So just check the box. So that I think is particularly neat, and I need to find out why I'm not getting things. Should be seeing a bunch of files appearing here, and I don't know if it's just because of the little bit of a delay, because Kinesis waits a minute, or if there's something that's not working when I'm doing this through this. I forgot to finish my point there. So I was looking at these with all the guys, and I was looking at the server stats, and it was really cool. And then today I installed FileMaker Server 17, and then I realized as I was getting ready to present this, that FileMaker 17 doesn't have stats view anymore. So it doesn't show you things like wait times and lap times and stuff like that. So
Yeah, generate those logs separately.
yeah, and I couldn't even find where to generate them in the logs. Do you guys?
Do you do them through the make?
Here I am. Does anybody know where I go to like generate those log files or view those stats?
There's a checkbox in there that's for the data, like the advanced detail logging on there, top call statistics.
Top call statistics is not the same thing I'm looking for. I'm looking for just stats.
What about the logs that are?
Choose log and download.
Top call.
I don't think
What's one above? I can't read them.
FileMaker data API.
I wonder if it's just on maybe it's not on there. It's just a file that it writes now.
Don't you do that in the command line?
Yeah, I know.
Is there something on the command line stuff that you can?
It might be. A lot of that stuff that's not on there now has moved to the command line, so it could be.
Now I know on Windows shows that stuff in the resource manager, but I'm not on Windows, and I don't really want to be. I'm not seeing anything. Oh, client stats maybe. That's on a per client basis. At least it's. Yeah.
Detailed logging option as well, but I might be wrong.
I'm not seeing that anywhere, and that would be a shame if they got rid of that because we use that a lot on our larger customers to like identify bottlenecks. And things. So at any rate, I haven't checked to make sure that I can do. I haven't tested this with the server thing since I switched to 17. I'm guessing that there's some configuration checkbox I need to do. Is there something that needs to be set to be able to use perform script on server?
I know there's a limit to the number of calls per simultaneous script session.
That I said. I actually bumped that up to 500.
Okay.
But I don't. Okay, well, this I don't want to waste everybody's time. I'll figure that out later. So I think that is all the demos that I have.
This is a startup incompatible script step.
Oh, maybe
Just
that's it.
window.
Maybe that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. There's something that's preventing the perform script on server from working, but I'll figure that out. It worked when we did it, when I was hosting it on server 16. Because I saw a bazillion things from Joe. So I know that was working at that time. I'll figure out what's going on there and fix that.
So with those guys connected now, can you run it again and do your search by record 6 or 9 or whatever and see if it shows?
Tell you what, let me
Warren
turn off the script on server, and then we'll be doing it on each client, and I think that works.
Oh, hey, can you try this? It's a command line. FMS admin enable client stats.
Oh, no, I'm getting client stats.
Oh, okay.
I've got a log here for client stats.
Okay.
But that's not really what I want because that's broken down on a per client basis. See, like all these say Jesse Barnum's MacBook Pro. Oh, yeah, you're right. And they're also very old, aren't they? This is really old. This is, and delete everything. And then see what, oh, I deleted the entire logs folder. So I'll just keep an eye on that. What was I gonna?
Oh, here it is. It's FMS admin enable server stats.
Oh,
That
okay.
creates a new stats.log file.
That's what I need. Tell me that again.
It's FMS admin
Uh-huh.
space enable space server stats, one word.
Cool. Thank you. Put that in my notes. All right, so now at DevCon, I'll be able to actually pull up that little log and show that the wait time is 0 for everything once we get that working.
We can change the interval if that apparently is like 15, 30 seconds. The default is 30 seconds for that. So
Right.
I don't know if you'll need to adjust that for.
Yeah, I'll make a note to. So that's the demos that I've got, and so if you're interested, and I'll go and send these slides out to everybody. If you're interested in a little bit of homework, I showed you Athena, Translate, Transcribe, S3, Kinesis, and we also did Simple Queue Service, so actually 6. There's a whole bunch more really cool stuff out there, and I've just picked a few of my favorites that I've used myself in projects or products. The only one I haven't used on this list is Recognition, and I have an upcoming project that I'm planning on using Recognition for. Recognition is a neat one. It's an image and face recognition database. So we're talking to a dance studio about maybe doing an attendance program so that as the dancers come in, we have a camera so that we can see who's coming in and who's leaving, and then take attendance that way.
So face recognition?
It'll say a person's demographics, their age. It's amazing. I've looked at it too.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So I'm not going to talk about.
Hey, this is how we're going to find criminals in the streets. In the year 2030, you mark my words.
Minority Report.
Exactly.
Before then, yeah.
Yeah, 2020.
Pre-pugs are way off.
So I won't go into what all these different services do, but they're all cool. So check into these, and if you really get the bug, then take a look at the entire catalog of products that Amazon Web Services have, and you'll see that this is still just kind of denting the surface a little bit, but there's still just loads under the hood.
SES is super useful for everything with FileMaker. It's just so easy to send emails
Yeah.
in bulk out to
wherever you need to send it to.
Yeah. And one thing I should have put in this list and I didn't is EC2. Because EC2 is what you use to launch virtual machines. So imagine having a FileMaker database that can you can click a button and that button would run a script on Amazon EC2 to start up a new virtual machine with a new fresh version of FileMaker server. And you might have 8 different buttons corresponding to 8 different configurations that you wanted to start up, for instance. And have another button to shut it down or terminate it. And if you just want to have a testing instance, you could have a little FileMaker console with a button to say make a small testing instance or a large testing instance or something. Yeah, I mean, that's all stuff that's doable. Everything that you can do in the AWS console, you can do through their API calls. In fact, their console is written on top of the API calls.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So yeah, anything that,
That's amazing.
yeah.
So it's very similar to the FileMaker console API.
No, sort of. There's a whole lot of things you can do in the FileMaker web admin that you can't do through the data admin. So in that sense that they're not, but it is similar in the sense that it's 2 different ways,
Right.
programmatic and manual, to accomplish things.
Actually, I think there's a lot of things that you can only do through the data API with Amazon as well that are not available through the
Yes.
through the GUI.
Yeah. S3 Select is one example of those. It's kind of like this. I showed you Athena. There's a similar service called S3 Select that I didn't demo because it's the same kind of thing, but it's only available through API calls. So the thing that I showed you with looking at the results of that audit log, you could actually build a FileMaker interface to use S3 Select to do all that and get the results of those audit logs within FileMaker. So you could have maybe like a little portal at the bottom that you could refresh to say, show all access to this record, for instance. So read about some of these things, pick 1 or 2 that sound cool and read about them. And then this is just boilerplate stuff that we get at the end of every DevCon thing. Thanks. Send your evaluation forms. And then Q&A. Thanks, guys.
I had a question.
Yes.
Is transcribe what we use, or Joshua posed this originally, but is transcribe what we use to transcribe our voicemail?
No. Because those are terrible. We need to start using transcribe. Yeah. So 360Works, we've got a phone system that I actually wrote using the Twilio APIs, and they have a canned voiced text voicemail thing, and it's hilariously awful. And so sometimes we all just like have to cluster around someone's screen to see what it did to somebody's voicemail message. Any other questions on any of this stuff? I think I'm going to rearrange some of these slides to really I think some of the slides that I put at the beginning, I really want to put at the end, because the message that I'm trying to get is this message right here, is that there's so much stuff out there. The Amazon ecosystem is so broad, and I don't want you to walk away from this session thinking, we learned a cool way to do audit logging in FileMaker. That's not really the point. The point here is we learned that there is this gigantic, untapped reservoir of cool stuff that we can do, and we can, using this generic script, we can call all of these APIs and call all these services and build custom things for clients.
I've got a question about stuff. What are some Amazon Web Services that you frequently find useful in a wide variety of solutions that you're working on? Like real common ones that you think everyone should check
Like
out?
your go-to toolbox.
Yeah.
SES is like you said, for sending emails. We use that in a ton of products. S3 is a very common one that gets used a lot.
Easy too. I mean, that's, yeah.
We're starting to use Lambda more and more. We haven't had many projects that use Lambda. Lambda is mind-bogglingly cool because essentially what it is it's like, imagine a virtual machine that instead of paying per hour that it's running, think of it kind of like a virtual machine that you pay for in 100 millisecond increments. And so you only pay for it when it's actually doing work, and then it stops and it's free. And then when there's more work for it to do, you pay for it in 100 millisecond increments, and it stops and you're not paying for it. And it's more than that, but that's kind of the best analogy that I can give. So we're starting to use Lambda more.
CloudWatch for like monitoring servers.
We set up CloudWatch on every server that we set up. We use Route 53 for all of our DNS stuff. We use
CloudFront.
CloudFront. Yeah, we use that for all of our downloads. Whenever you download a 360Works product, and you're using that for your video stuff as well.
Yeah, all over the world.
Whenever you download a 360Works product, you're getting it from CloudFront. Not all of the services that I'm talking about are necessarily good candidates for API integration from FileMaker. Unless, for instance, you were wanting to build like a hosting control panel. You know, if you wanted to build a FileMaker-based hosting control panel, a lot of these services would be extremely applicable to that kind of thing. You know, you could have one button that would say, set up the deluxe package for client X, go. And it could spin up the virtual machines, create the DNS, set up the Active Directory accounts, upload all their files to S3, start the FileMaker instance, you know, just do the entire thing from end to end. And then similar buttons for stop or upgrade or downgrade or anything along those lines.
What's the nightly snapshot script?
Oh yeah, the Lambda backup thing.
Yeah.
So so yeah, we use Lambda to if you are used to at all, if you're used to using cron to kick off periodic jobs, we've switched all of our cron jobs to Lambda, and so essentially they exist as code that lives on Lambda, and then we can schedule them to run at certain intervals. And they kick in and they run, and we, you know, like I said, we pay for it in 100 millisecond increments. So one of the Lambda things that we've run is that every 5 minutes, we scan every single Amazon hard drive in EC2 for certain tags. And if we spot certain tags, we make a snapshot of that volume. So it's a really easy way to, you know, have persistent backups of all of our important data.
This might be a way deeper question. But have you seen a tipping point imbalance between EC2 instance usage and Lambda as far as pricing goes?
Yeah. Lambda.
That'd be huge.
Yeah. Lambda is almost always cheaper if you're running small instances. If you run in really large instances, it might be cheaper to run EC2. But I would say from a cost perspective, if you have a service that can run on Lambda, you will absolutely, without doubt, save money by putting on Lambda. Not every service is good for Lambda. For instance, FileMaker Server can't run on Lambda. One, because Lambda is not Windows, and two, because Lambda is stateless. So the stateless thing is a big limitation of Lambda, and it kind of has to be that way by architectural design, is that any jobs that you put on Lambda have to be able to start, do their work, you know, get a set of inputs, fire up, run their job, return an output, and stop. So like mirror sync is a good example of something that would not be a good candidate for Lambda, because mirror sync is stateful. You know, for the entire duration of the sync, it has to keep all this stuff in memory and talk to a bunch of different services, and services need to talk to it. So mirror sync is a good example of something that couldn't run on Lambda. But anything that you have that can, if it's a batch processing job, like I want to feed 10,000 URLs, and then I want Lambda to go out and go to each URL and do a screenshot of that and save that screenshot to S3. That's a perfect example of a stateless kind of job that can be load balanced across 1,000 different Lambda instances. So it's going to finish in like 5 seconds, no matter how many you give it. And it's a stateless thing that has a very well-defined input, duration, and output. So anything that kind of fits that architectural mold, I would absolutely do using Lambda instead. Logging in is a good example. So one of the Lambda functions that we wrote for a live project was a login thing. It's a client-side JavaScript, but the login has to be server-side because that has to be secure. So they put in the credentials, hit login, that fires up a Lambda function that checks a database to make sure that they're valid, which sets what they need and then redirects them to the site, and then it ends. And so that's a perfect example of, you know, of a Lambda function. And for that particular service, we had a formal load testing process that we did through, and we had 40,000 connected users in that process, with 5,000 more adding on every minute till it got to 40,000. and then ramped down, and it never had a blip in terms of processing. Because you can have up to 1,000 Lambda processes going simultaneously in your account, and if that's not enough, you can just call and request more. Any other questions? Did you ask? Oh, sorry, Earl. Yeah, you.
Can we get your scripts?
yeah, definitely. David, can I send them to you, and then you can post them?
Yeah, they'll be. I'll put a link in the YouTube video.
Okay.
And then we'll do just a session summary post again.
I'll send them to you tomorrow because I want to do a little bit of cleanup based on some of the notes that I took tonight.
And change your secret code.
Yeah.
I've already got a reminder. My session is from 10 to 11, and I have a reminder at 11:30. Remove secret code.
We're going to see insert secret code here.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hey, David, don't forget we need to figure something out for next month.
Okay. You're still connected here. You want to discuss
for what you really want to create for AWS is a sense of awe.
So real quick for everyone here, we need a topic for next. Topics for next time. You know, one thing that's what I think we should do every time. That's what we've done in the past, and I think that's a really good one. How many people here are going to DEF CON? I'm going to that. 3 people. Are you going to a session? Are you going to sessions too?
I'm gonna hear about the secret. I don't have any.
They will be at
well, I'll listen to Jesse. Jesse, you're going to sessions? Are you going to any sessions?
I'll be at the booth.
I don't want to be the only one that's like, here's everything that happened at DEF CON.
Well, I won't be here either in person or in online. My wife is going into surgery next month during the meeting, so I'm going to be there. It will kind of look strange if I'm in the hospital.
Well, okay, I mean, so one thing I like to that I think is really useful is to talk about like what's something that you learned from DEF CON. But I want to be the like. I don't want to fill up an hour with that. Yeah, that's still going on here. Yep.
What about on our live stream? We ask other people, like we make a list.
Well, maybe we can do that. We don't usually have a ton of people, but maybe we can get more people on. I don't know, maybe I can collect people at DEF CON.
Would there be a way to get like multiple people on that one screen? Like, you know, like one window, like
the Brady Bunch style?
Yes.
Like I have
diversity of the FileMaker.
I don't have the software for that right now. But we can do that.
A while back, we kind of just did a show and tell. Everyone just kind of brought something.
That's what I really like to do for like DEF CON focus. Say, you know, everyone, and if there's anyone watching on here still too, you know, like I was like bring something back from DEF CON and share that with everybody. Because everyone learns so much.
By the way, about that issue that was explained before, do I just need to contact FileMaker and say that I have, you know, I got FileMaker 17 from the updated from the contract?
I'm gonna end this thing here because we're still going on here. Anyone watching, if you have any suggestions, you can send me an email, david@bluefeathergroup.com. We're gonna talk about more topics here. So thank you very much.